warahmatullah, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us in Architecture and Design Talk, issue number 9. So Ed Plus is a talk series hosted by the Department of Architecture, and we are bringing this live via WebEx. And for today's issue, we will be having Miss Julie Kiing, who will be talking about a topic called From Space to Place. So I think Miss Julie, you are here already, okay? So just some background information on Miss Julie. She is our part-time lecturer in UNIMAS, teaching currently in the first year studio. She graduated with an architecture degree from Universiti Technology Malaysia, UTM, and with a corporate master in business administration, MBA in UNIMAS. Her working experiences include 5 years in Johor and Singapore. She has dealt with quite a number of public amenities and industrial building projects. And also she has an approximately 5 years experience working in Australia, or working with an Australia counterpart, I think mainly on residential designs projects. And I think Julie, if you are ready on your end there, I think I shall pass this session to you, Miss Julie.
Okay, I will start now. So basically, I will be talking about a very basic topic of design, which is space to place. Before I start with this, I would like to proceed to explain on the very basic introductions of designs, element of designs. Next slide. So basically, in first year students especially, you already experience doing design using lines, straight lines, horizontal, vertical lines, or even diagonal lines, or circular curved lines, and then you go into the colors, especially in your first few projects. You experiment with texture in your collage projects. You experiment with shapes, different shapes, and different combination of shapes, line and color to form different emotions and different feelings to your design. That goes to the size of your line weight, for example, the thickness of your line weight, and how you do different hatchings, create different values to your design. And now we go into the space. Next slide. So there is this famous quotes by this Winston Churchill that we talk about. We shape our buildings thereafter they shape us. So the shape and the space that create within our building is very important. So what is space? There is a lot of different kind of space, from physical space. So physical space is basically the volume air bounded by the physical items like wall, floor, ceilings, or sometimes it's just space, a park, for example, it's just open space. It's also considered a physical space. Next. Next. Then we come into a perceptual space, a space that can persist and be seen. So for example, if we are looking at buildings, they might have like space with windows, big windows, curtain windows, transparent surface that we can look into. Not only buildings, for example, we have one form or shape of items, and when we have a transparent space that is we can look into, then you assume that this is the space that this form contains. But next slide. But this might not be true, as in because the space that we see might not exactly be the space that is only available within that form. For example, if we look at this image, this is a big window openings that we can actually look through from floor to ceiling height openings. And if by one look, our perception space towards this image will be the space that we can see within here. But however, if you are talking about the actual space within this house, for example, there are space that is above these ceilings, there is space that is next to the wall, that is on the left-hand side or the right-hand side. So those are the space that we cannot actually see within this image eventually, but it's still a space within these buildings lah. So we will go into this conceptual space. For the conceptual space, basically is a mental map that we carry around in our head. So what is conceptual space? So when we think about a design, we have this image of a house, for example. But for example, if we are talking about the house, we are very much influenced by our local design, our local layout of the house. So in our mind, that is the space that we need. For example, if we design a house, a very fast conceptual space that will come into our mind is the living room, the dining room, our bedroom, the washrooms, and also some other space like dining kitchens, wet spaces, the space to dry our clothes, for example. This is a very fast conceptual space that will come into our mind when we are given a task, for example, designing a house. But how about designing other spaces that we are not exposed to? For example, design a hospital. What kind of space that we actually need to design that hospital? That we need to go through different kind of like exploration. We need to go through, we need to look into Googles. We need to talk to the person in charge there on what kind of space they actually have. Then only we can have this kind of mental maps on what we can design within that buildings. I believe that all of the students are very enthusiastic and passionate towards architecture. So with this passion and enthusiasm towards architecture, maybe try to look more into like architecture magazines or even informations that you can be found in Google, in online, or in a virtual magazines that you can find in Facebook, for example. Go through those kind of things, because the more you see, the more you explore in architecture, then the more mental maps you will have when you come into like certain tasks to do. Then you already have the memory of the things that you previously explored, for example. So when you have a bigger mental maps, then a lot easier for you to do a new task and a lot easier for you to explore new designs. Next one is the behavioral space. So when we talk about behavioral space, it's the space that we can use or work through. For example, if there's a table in the middle of the room, the physical space under the table has not changed, but we can only walk around that space. Then we go to the next slide, we can see the image. So when we do design, sometimes we don't keep the space all open and empty. For example, if we design a dining room, or for example, what we see here is a gallery. So basically, we don't always keep the gallery empty so that people can have all the space to walk around and view on the gallery. Sometimes we design a chair in the middle, so that the function of the chair, other than what we can see, is that people can sit around when they are tired, or they can sit around enjoying the graphic that is displayed on the walls, for example. There can also be a directional guide for people to move around within that space. For example, in these situations, when you have a chair in the middle of the gallery, you don't work like from one side to the other side of the gallery, but instead you will walk around the chair. So you can go around and enjoy like every single view of the display within that gallery. Okay, next. Next will be the interwoven place. it's like the connected space that flow into one another. Can we go to the next slide? Explain on this one. So we can see that within this house itself, this is an interwoven space. So you can see from the front entrance of this house, it's actually a car park below there, but they design it like directly going into the house and staircase going out. This space here in the middle is actually the interwoven space, where normally people would say it's just a staircase corner, but how this design actually utilize the corner of the staircase to be transformed into another study space or even office space. And this space will further go on with a few steps going out to another space, which is the living room of the house. So this is kind of explanations on interwoven space. Okay, a rough explanation on that, then we will go on onto the static space. Static space is basically an isolated space. So any space that you form is considered a static space. For example, the living room is a static space. The dining room is a static space. Storeroom is a static space. So it has their own function. So we go to the next one. This one is actually very straightforward, the static space. Basically, any space that you created is a static space. And meanwhile, the directional space is basically an obvious path that leads towards another directions. We go to the next slides. So basically, it depends on where is the situation of this directional space. It could be indoor, it could be outdoor, but most of the situation is covered so that you can feel like there is this direction guides towards this another space. So for example, here we can see there is space A and space B. So the space and connection in the middle is the directional space. Next slide. So this is one of the example of directional space, which is the linkway or covered walkway, for example. So obviously, when you see a linkway like this, you will go along this linkway instead of you walk along the grass that is next to it. Next slide. And non-directional space. When it comes to non-directional space, normally we go into like path. For example, there is variety of path that leads into the building or space within that. We go into the next slides. Like for example, this part here, then you can see that this part is actually an open space as well. But how different pathway can bring the people into this path, then you can see there is different path that is leading towards this space. So every single path actually formed by a space. So how you are going to utilize like different space that is within this path is very important, because or else if there is no activity within the path, then people might not try that path. People might just walk through towards the side of the road. For example, you can see the side of the road, the car parks, if the car park there, and there is no function of the space within the path or the park inside there, they might just walk along the pathway instead of going into the park. Okay, next we go into the positive and the negative space. This is actually a design concept. When we talk about positive and negative space, it's actually a very simple design concept that we can always utilize, but it's very little being experimented within architecture designs. For example, when we talk about positive space, actually is the space that is taken out by actual stuff like furniture, lightings, artwork, accessory, etc. Like for example, if we are inside a dining room, then the actual space, the positive space are actually space that is utilized for the chair, for the table, for example, for people to sit on and enjoy their meals, for example. But negative space is the empty space around it, between everything. So to talk about it, whether negative space is actually that bad or good, in my opinion, negative space is actually required as well in every single design. Why? Because it's actually a breathing space for every single room or design. Because imagine if your room is so compact with all different furnitures, all different items or lighting upwards, for example, then you won't have this space for you to breathing space within the room lah. So it's actually very important as well. So we go to the next slide. This is one of the experiment of positive and negative space design, Tadao Church in Osaka, Japan. So you can see that normally when we design a church, normally we have a cross in the middle of the church, right? But what they do now is actually in this design, they create void between the wall instead of putting a cross on it. So this is how they utilize the negative and positive space to form a design for this church. And other than that, this opening and cross shape there actually allows natural lightings into the church as well. So next one. So now we go into place. What makes a space a place? So is it important to have a place? Whether space is more important or place is more important? Actually, I will explain it this way. Actually, I do a lot of readings online, and this is what I found out. And place is not necessarily enclosed or open. We can say a space and place in different manners. For example, in architecture-wise, place is basically formed by having a space in it for, how to explain? Space is basically a white canvas. I will say it this way. Space is basically a white canvas for architects to design it and make it into a place. What is a place then? A place, in order to form a good place, they need to have a good accessibility and linkware towards the place. Means that that place need to be accessible. So other than that, it need to be a social ability of this place is very important, like whether if people can social within that space or not, and the use and the activity. Whenever you design a place, you need to know that what kind of activity that needs to be there can happen there, or you can create the activities to be there, or the comfort and the image of the place. Next slide. So when we talk about place, a very important component of the place is the community of the place itself. Next slide. The first element of the community will be the people. Who is the user of the place? It can be a baby, it can be a children, it can be adults, it can be old people. So we go into the next slides. A very quick example of a place creating is, for example, this space. You might look at it as a very small space that is enclosed within the cupboards. But this design actually is to encourage a space that is feasible for kids with autism, for example, have learning disability. So they need to have a very cozy, a small space, restrained space to make them feel very comfortable within, that they can learn within their comfort zone, I would say. So sometimes when people talk about comfortable space and place, they talk about a very big space so that they can do whatever they want. But in this situation, for example, for a children with autism, a smaller space will give them more comfort, the sense of ownership, the sense of safety towards the space itself. So as a designer, as an architect, it's very important for you to understand like the purpose and the lifestyle and who is the user of the space. Like we look into this design in Tokyo, for example, it's a Nakagin capture tower. So for this one, we will need to look into the culture of these Japanese people. Basically, they are very workaholic. They work from early morning until late at night, and basically they go home just to sleep. Yes, they just need a space for them to sleep, to wash up, to clean up, to take a bath and then rest for a few hours before they go out and then continue their work life again. So which is why many years ago they come out with this design of capsule tower where the people who live inside only require a sleeping space. And talking about these people, actually is a community of people from outside of Japan that they travel into Tokyo in order to get a job, in order to work, in order to earn money. So this is the culture that they have in Japan. So what about the culture that we have here in Malaysia? What kind of culture, for example, maybe if we design for Malaysians, what kind of lifestyle that we have? Do we currently still like utilize living room so much? We still utilize the dining room so much. So next one is the purpose of the space. So for example, what we can see from the image below, there is two different situations. We need to know when we design a restaurant, for example, we design it for what kind of customer that they need. If the restaurant cater more for like family kind of gathering, big gatherings, that we may go for the left-hand side, where a round table, a bigger table is actually can sit more people. And other than that, it's actually easier for the people to communicate with each other in round table compared to a square table. This is part of your design considerations. So when you design the space for this restaurant in the first picture, for example, maybe the shape of the space or the place itself can actually be round shape. We go back to the previous message, previous slides. Round space, so that there is less wastage of the corners. For example, if we design a rectangular or a square size space, then it will be a lot of corners and wastage. Then if we go to the second image, we can see that this restaurant is designed for single individual, working individuals that might have to go for a quick lunch, for example, only one person without any other partner. So it's a bit awkward. I don't know if any one of you ever experienced going to a restaurant and then you are alone. Your friends happen to be very busy with their own things. Then it's a bit awkward to sit there and on a big table and then you sit alone. So the second design here basically is catered for like the people who go to a cafe and eat alone instead of having partners that eat together. And they might have a design like electric plugs for them to work for a quick email or something like that. So this kind of design perhaps is something that we need more and more in future. For example, in current situation where we have all this COVID-19 where one table can only sit maximum 2 people, or some might only be enough for 1 person. So sooner or later, we need to adjust our design to suit the new lifestyles. And next slides. These slides, we basically talk about events. So just now we talk about event when we are in a park. So every single space that we design, we need to know if there's able to cater for a event. For example, if we see this is a design of a pavilion in Kuching, in Sarawak Craft Center. So these all people are actually utilizing this pavilion for doing their Tai Chi practice in the morning. So this is kind of event that can make the place happening. So if there's no people doing events within the space or place that you create, it's very difficult to define that space as a place, because imagine a pavilion that is open where no people go there, no people utilize it, and no people even pass by that pavilion. That basically cannot be defined as a place. Okay, next one. Next one, another very important component of this place making is actually the culture. So we go into next. So what is the most important current issues that we have? Culture is very much influenced by issues. So I believe that everyone is very much aware of the current issues that we're currently facing. Next slide. Is the COVID-19. So what kind of life and lifestyle that we are looking at when we encounter these issues like COVID-19? Do we see like there is lifestyles that change towards our everyday lifestyle? For example, if we go out more often or we stay at home more often. And one thing that I realized, something that I've been, this is actually a photo captured in Vietnam. So one thing that I noticed, the first thing that remind me when the COVID-19 came out is that this photo is actually captured way before COVID-19. So when I went to Vietnam, I see that everyone is wearing masks there. Due to the congested traffic, they are all using, basically all using motorcycles, mostly I would say. And they have this habit of using masks. So when I was there, I was very surprised because it's not our culture here to wear masks when we go out, even in certain places or area that is more congested, more motorcycles, and even in China, for example, you will see this kind of traffic, but there is no such habit of wearing masks. So the first thing that come into my mind when people talk about wearing masks, when people talk about COVID, it reminds me of the people in Vietnam. So that is how their lifestyle, they used to be like that. So it's very easy for them to adjust when there is COVID-19 situations. This also explains like why the number of infection in Vietnam is so little, because when we are still trying to adjust our lifestyle to suit the COVID-19 situations, the people there are actually already having this kind of habit and lifestyle. Okay, next. So we talk about COVID-19. I'm not sure about everyone, but for myself, when this COVID-19 came in, I have to stay at home more often, work from home, and the family time is more and more together. So previously, I ever considered about the importance of the living room, the kitchen, and the dining room within a apartment, within a house, because actually before these COVID-19 situations, I believe most of us especially working adults, kids with families. I don't know, like for example, teenagers, they prefer to eat out, they prefer to go out with their friends. For example, family, the parents will be working the whole day from 8 to 5, for example, and they go home only during the night time and have very little family times together. And basically, living room, dining room, and especially kitchen is very, very much not utilized. I know this is the image that we are looking at, like a happy family sitting together, discussing together, but we look into the next image. Perhaps the reality is more something like this. Everyone is carrying their own device, doing their own things. So I am not sure. An open question for everyone is that whether the virtual space that is within the internet is considered a space also, because perhaps there is a revolution in architecture in the future where we might not only be designing a physical space, a room, or a building, we might be designing the space that is within the virtual, the electronics products, online spaces that is inside the computer. This could be part of our revolutions of architecture design in the future. Okay, next we'll go into the lifestyle change. So when we stay home more often in these COVID-19 situations, I noticed that more and more clients that requested me to do design have requests like gym room within their home. This is being more and more practical because the people nowadays are getting more and more health conscious. So a lot of them before COVID-19, they actually joined a lot of gym, they joined a lot of fitness classes. But due to COVID-19, there's this safety concern, infection concern. So eventually, they started to buy like this sport equipment and equip it at home. Next. Then we question about the needs of the living room and the kitchen, for example. We go into the next slide. So before COVID-19, actually kitchen, I believe it's the same for everyone, but for me, before COVID-19, my kitchen is super clean. It's never been used before. So why I show the image of living room and kitchen, because whenever we design a house, most of the cost that is spent to furnish and the interior design, for example, and to make the house looks good, the highest expenses goes to living room and the kitchen actually. The bedroom, normally people go very simple, the wardrobe, the bed, a study table, and that's it. But the most money is being spent on the kitchen, for example, to equip with a nice built-in cabinets, and the living room, a big set of sofa that can furnish, for example, one family, 12 people, they have 12 chairs in the family rooms. But how much of the time that we actually spend on this kind of room in the kitchen, actually cooking, utilizing the stuff that you buy, 10K, 20K kind of stuff together with the food, one set, for example. So all this kind of lifestyle change actually influence your design. If let's say you design your house before this COVID-19, I would consider and tell the owner of the house and ask them whether they actually cook often or not, so that I can decide on the size of the space that I give for the kitchen. Or if there is a lot of family member within the family, then I will advise on the size of the family room or the living space. But what I can talk about living space here is actually, if comparison, because I work a lot for the residential house in Australia. So in comparison with residential house in Australia and Malaysia, for example, ours is very much commercialized. I think in previous talk by Dr. Azhar previously, she already talked about how the terrace house in Malaysia currently, the standard one, everything is actually very standard, the layout cannot actually cater for the different culture and lifestyle of Malaysians. So same goes to Australia and Malaysia. The biggest comparison is that normally in Australia, they have when they enter the house, they go for the bedroom first before they go into the living room. So normally for the living room, they call it the family room. So we can see that this is the cultural difference between the Australian and the Malaysians. Why is the bedroom first? Because in Australia, it's actually, I would say in Malaysia, we are a lot more inviting, welcoming to the people who come towards our house. So the living room is in front, so that when people come to our house, then there is this kind of welcoming feelings, that feeling accepted within that space. But in Australia, it's more on the privacy of that family space itself. So they prefer that the family space is actually behind towards the inner side of the house, so that it's not disturbed by external people. Like from the front facade of the house, it's very difficult to directly see the family space. But our culture in Malaysia is more welcoming to guests, to our guests that come to our house. So the family space, the living space is very much towards the front of the house. And if we talk about Malay house design, they have this rambi in front of house. So this is part of our culture here in Malaysia. Next slide. Then we go into the heritage. It's part of and parcel of the culture as well. This one is a tulou in Fujian, China. So we can see this design is basically shaped in circular high wall, where all the rooms are placed around that circular wall with communal area in the middle of the buildings. So this is the time where safety of the community of the people is very important. So this design is very protective of the communal area. So the external part is basically lived by adults people, where the middle part, towards the middle part of this tulou, is more on the medical space, the living space for the old people. For example, for the kindergartens, the teaching space for the kids, for example, will be towards the middle part of the tulou. So this is part of and parcel of the heritage design. However, this kind of design, when it cross different ages, might not so applicable anymore, because war is no longer that often happening in this war. I wouldn't say that it's totally no. We do have different countries around the world that actually still facing war problems, still have problem to secure their home. But for example, in this context in China, this design is actually very much no longer applicable, which is why people starting to move out of the tulou and then go into a more common living space that suit their current lifestyles. Next slide. So for heritage, I'm not saying that traditional buildings, heritage building is not important. They have their own reasons on designing every single space, etc. For example, you can see at the left image here, it's actually Chinese 四合院. They call it a courtyard house in China. So this is a very traditional method of creating house. So the open space of the traditional house, Chinese house, for example, is within the middle. So that when you enter, you see the top part here, there is main door towards this courtyard house, for example. So it's very protective. They have very minimal openings towards the outside of the buildings, where they have more openings towards the middle courtyard of the buildings to ensure the safety of the building is served, and then to make sure that there is this ventilations, etc., towards the building, despite not having too much opening towards the outside. So on the right side, you can see there's this modern interpretation of courtyard house. For example, they still have the courtyard in the middle, but they no longer need the middle courtyard used for, like, for example, drying area, meeting space, but they still create like pergola in the middle for gatherings, for barbecue, for example. So this is more like a modern interpretation of a courtyard house. Next. Next thing about this place making is about this context and accessibilities. Next slide. So in placemaking, context is very important as well. We cannot be designing a school, for example, in the middle of the deserts that have no people, that has no community. So it's very important that whenever you start a design, you know your context. What are the buildings that is around that context? For example, this area is a high density area with school, with office space, with different residential area. Then the client want you to design a shopping mall. So maybe you need to know like what kind of school there, what kind of living area, residential area there, whether it's a high-end residential area, middle-end, or towards a more common residential area. Then only you can know like what kind of shopping space to design for this space, so that it suits the community that is living within this context. For example, if you are designing a shopping mall in a poor living residential area, then the shopping mall actually sells all the branded stuff, only super high end, that the community couldn't purchase, or they don't even bother to go into that malls. Then that could create the problems to the building that you actually design. Next. Next is the accessibilities. So whether the space and place that you design that is accessible by people, or the client that is you are catering to, is very important as well. So for example, if you are designing a building for all fours, definitely you need all kind of ramps in order to make the building accessible by wheelchair. Next. And this not only constrained to human being. So if you have a cat or a dog, for example, you might want to design a cat door, for example, for a cat to enter. So this is part and parcel of the design. You might want there, for example, given a task to design animals home, shelter. So you need to consider the accessibility for different kind of clients, including animals. Next. So next very important thing is the identity. So in order to make your space into a place, the identity of the place is very important to make sure that people recognize it. Next. For example, the country identity. Very easily we can recognize that this one is the KL Twin Tower. So this is our Malaysia identity. Whenever we talk about Malaysia, so they know KLCC. So sometimes there is this mixed feeling when people talk about Sarawak. Whenever I like to travel and I go overseas, most of the time I travel alone, backpacking. So I meet different people from different countries. And when we talk about, I stay from Sarawak, I'm from Sarawak. And they ask, which country is Sarawak in? So I say, I'm from Malaysia. So whenever we talk about Malaysia, they only know about KL and they don't know about Sarawak. So there is this mixed feeling whenever I meet people. It's very difficult for me to explain to them that yes, I am from Malaysia, KL is the capital. But whenever I talk about Sarawak, they assume that Sarawak is within Kuala Lumpur. So yeah, it's more like Kuala Lumpur is a country instead of Sarawak. I don't know. But uh, that is how the country identity play their parts. Next one. So when we see this image, we will reminds us of Australia, and next, then this image will remind us of London. Not only actually buildings, you can see like bridge and linksways, and it could be like not modern buildings at all. Like this building that was built many years ago as a fortress for China, for example, now become a very big identity for China. Whenever you see this, you know that this is from China. Next one. Next one will be the cultural identity. So, like for example, in Semenanjung, Malaysia, there is different type of Malay house. So when you see a Malay house built, then from different features, from different elements that is shown within that Malay house, you know that people who stay inside that Malay house from which state. Because we can see now, Kelantan people might be in Johor working, Pahang people might be in Penang working. So they are from different places. We move from different states of Malaysia. Then our living space, our design, our house actually can represent the place that we come from. For example, I'm from Sarawak. I stay in Johor for more than 10 years. So if let's say I'm going to design a Sarawak rumah panjang in Johor, maybe the context is not that accurate. But if you see like this example here in Melaka, the most easiest identity that you can see there is, yeah, you can go to this slide actually, is that they actually have these steps, concrete steps that is leading towards the house. And you see different cultural identity have different space. For example, this Malay house, how they utilize a different space within the serambi, rumah ibu, dapur, for example. If it is interpreted into the modern buildings, then it can bring the cultural identity with the house itself. It not necessarily need to be a wooden house. It not necessarily need to be of the actual materials of the cultural design, but how they bring in the culture and the identity towards the house itself lah. So if let's say we design a house now with a rumah ibu and rumah dapur separated, with a selang in between to separate the privacy of the house itself. So this new design actually can represent the culture of Malay people. Next. And then another identity that it will represent is the cultural identity, the designer identity. For example, architects that actually carries a very strong identity, I would say, is Zaha Hadid. You can see that all her design is actually very fluid. Not only the external, we go into the next slide to see even to the internal of the design, interior of the design. On the left hand side is actually the Galaxy Soho in Beijing, for example. You can see that not only the outside of the building is bringing in all the parametric design, the fluid design, but only the also the internal of the building itself. You can see on the right hand side is the London Aquatic Centre. The ceiling is actually designed to flow according like the movement of the water. Next one. And then the design doesn't only stop in the building. You can see that even the design, someone asked her to design shoes. The design of the shoes also become her identity. You can see that this shoes is very much like Zaha Hadid. So this is somewhat a designer identity. So if you can bring like designer identity into a place, space, for example, it can form into a place. If you visit a country, for example, and you know that there is this building especially designed by Zaha Hadid, people will have more tendency to go and view that building to experience how the space that she designed can bring different kind of feelings compared to the conventional buildings, the square and rectangular buildings. I'm not saying that square and rectangular building is not good, but then the importance that is given towards it will be different. The identity, the square and rectangular buildings, the space might have its own usage. For example, if there is certain purpose of the space that needs to make it square or rectangular, then it needs to be like that. Next one. So all about placemaking. So why it is so important to make placemaking in every single space that you design. So we can see that without a proper placemaking, without all the identity, without all the cultural or community elements, the space will soon be abandoned. For example, this massive mall in Bangkok, for example, being abandoned due to the mall is no longer be able to cater for the lifestyle, for the community that is around that shopping mall. So I hope that whoever that design a space or a place, make sure that you put more efforts into the space itself and think about the lifespans of the buildings. You don't design one big shopping mall just to cater it for a 5 year or a 10 years. You need to think about the community, the area, the people within that space for maybe another 50 to 100 years, for example, to make sure that that building is sustainable to be built. Okay, roughly that's all from me. Thank you. May I know if there's any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Julie. I think we can allow the members of audience to ask questions directly to Ms. Julie. I believe there will be a lot of questions from the floor. Students or lecturers, you are all welcome to ask questions. Maybe some comments that you would like to make? Yeah, Mervyn.
Hello.
Okay. I think the topic is very much relevant to especially to our students because I think space and place are the factors which are very much fundamental. So and I like to think of our space and the environment as an extension of ourself, our own body. So if we want to be nice to ourselves, we have to treat our space nicely also. If there's no any question from the floor, I have a question myself. I think I would like to ask you a question based on your experience working as an architectural designer for a developer, if I'm not mistaken, in Australia. Am I correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So have there been a significant shift in the demands from the client or the end users in regards to responding to the current pandemic situation in terms of space?
In terms of space, basically for now, what we can see in terms of our design that we have accepted very recently for the residential house that is designed after the case that we have taken after the COVID situations, is that we noticed that they put a lot more importance to the living area, the family space, compared to previously. Previously, there is cases where I accept, where the client asked me to design a house that actually doesn't have a living room at all, with a very small kitchen, with a very minimal dining area, actually just a bar table for them to have a quick lunch or a dinner, and with rooms, bigger rooms, where every single rooms are actually equipped with televisions, with all the electronics products. But now when it comes into pandemic, I noticed that the portion that is given to the living room and the family room and kitchen is especially become bigger and more spacious. So I believe that this is a permanent change to lifestyle, not only during these COVID-19 situations, because now that people notice the importance of this kind of spaces, then they will put more efforts in making such space within the residential area.
So there is a question here from Anis in the chat box. I have a question regarding the lifespan, as said just now. Well, how do we try to make sure the lifespan of space, if the money given is limited?
It depends on what situations. May I have like a more specific what kind of building they are looking for? Because let's say, for example, it's a shopping mall. If you are looking at 50 to 100 years to come, I believe that shopping will go more and more into a virtual space instead of a physical shopping like the shopping mall that we have now. So if you are going to design a shopping mall in the future, what kind of articulation on the space that is needed to be done, for example, is maybe the shop become very smaller, it become very small, it become more like a collection point for people instead of retail point where people will go in and then enjoy the space, buying whatever thing they want. This is a kind of revolutions. So I believe for a lot of developers and investors in these few years, they're very scared to invest in shopping mall, for example. This is from business point of view. Some of the project, for example, I have seen have slowly slowed down or even stopped immediately due to this reason, because they foresee that commercial area, all this commercial area, the big commercial area or the expensive luxury commercial area eventually will be scaled down, and lesser people will go to window shopping. This is a permanent change of lifestyle. It won't be just for this COVID-19 situation only. It will leave a very deep memory for every one of us, not only during this period of time. I believe in 5 or 10 years to come, everyone will remember what are the difficult times we went through financially, and especially those that got infected, for example. This will give more like a permanent change to their lifestyle. So eventually all the architecture space and place will need to change to suit the lifestyle as well. So when you talk about limited money given, I'm not sure on space you are talking about and what kind of limited money that is given, because for me lifespan and the money given actually doesn't influence each other, because like what I explained earlier, it doesn't mean like having a big space, bigger space will give more meanings to that, to make it a place. Instead, a suitable size of the space will give more meanings to the place itself. Yeah, so it's not about how much money you spend, it's about how suitable the design to suit this coming 30 years to 50 years. And for example, if your clients, let's say I want 1 million to spend on this building, architects can always counter propose something if you feel like there is a need for you to tell the client what kind of difference they can give, like if they spend another 500,000 or another million or another 10 million to that building. As a business person, I personally do some business as well. So as a business person, if a architect tell me that if I spend additional 1 million for this building, and I can make sure that this building can be more suitable for this community for another 100 years compared to what that the money you give to me can only be feasible for like 10 years, for example, I will very willing to spend the extra 1 million. Of course, if it is within my capabilities. If not within my capability, then susah lah, right? So yeah, because sometimes a building that doesn't have lifespan, then eventually it will become a abandoned building. So it defeats the purpose to design that building lah. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we can afford to take one more question from the floor. Is that okay, Julie?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? You can ask any types of question. I think philosophical question or business questions, because I think Julie is also a business involved in business, so it has to relate to the topic of a space and place lah. So there's a question from Donna. What would be your advice on the design process or steps upon receiving the client's brief?
Upon receiving the client brief, the first and most important steps that we'll need to go through is to understand what the clients want, what kind of then when you know what the clients want, you need to look into what are the people that is going to utilize the buildings, the context. For example, you need to see how feasible the buildings when it is built within the context, and normally a site that is given by the clients. And then only we can give suggestions, feasible suggestions to our client.
One more question over there. If you're looking in the future, does the space as such shopping mall needed because we have an online shopping platform?
Shopping mall, whether it's needed. It's a very subjective question lah. It's more like, I would say that shopping mall is still needed, but maybe shopping mall will transform into another form, another different type of shopping malls.
Sorry, Julie, I think we've just lost you here. Couldn't hear you. I think you are okay.
Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry, there's an interruptions there. And then when you talk about shopping malls, yes, I think it's still needed. But how to transform that shopping mall to be more feasible in coming 50 to 100 years? For example, if you need something urgently, a shopping mall will be the options, the fastest way for you to gain the item that you want. but it will definitely change the retail atmosphere, as in maybe certain bigger corporations will have problem in transforming, then they will need to find way to transform. So if let's say a big shopping mall like Aeon, if they couldn't transform into online platform, that it will bring problems to them in the future. I would say that shopping mall is still needed, but maybe cater for different purpose. Like maybe next time it's more like every single shop lots will be more like how to say they have this online more like a studio for them to sell their items through online. Then the people can come over to pick it immediately or something like that. It could be something more like a vending machine where people can just come and pick the items without any needs of human or salesperson uh, or retail space that you can work around with. Or it could even be just a big screen for you to pick whatever you want, and then eventually the item will appear or sent to you. So this will be different possible transformations of shopping malls.
Yeah, I think we can all agree.
Has
Okay, there's
Sarawakian
another.
culture influenced me?
Yeah.
Yes, definitely. Um, when I first, it's very funny. When I first worked in Singapore, I remember when I was first enrolled in a company in architecture firm in Singapore. Then they asked me to do a house design. It's very funny how I do the design. Eventually, they feel like it's a bit too luxurious for them in terms of the space, because in Sarawak here, our land is too big, our space is too big. So our proportion of the house that we have within our mind is very different compared to what they have in Singapore, for example. So yes, Sarawakian culture definitely influenced me. And for example, I catered too big a living room. I still remember I designed a very big living room for the communal people, for the family there. Then eventually the client tell me that they actually spend like only 1 hour a day in the living room, which if they spend too much space for the living room, because their land is so limited, that they will design their house basically all terrace from ground floor all the way 4 story, and that's the max. And they will maximize the front and the back of the house all until, so that they can make sure that they have enough space for the bedrooms, etc. So if I design too big a living room for them, that is not suitable for their context. So this is one of the mistakes that I have done previously. So it's very important for you to understand their culture, their lifestyle, in order to make sure that your design suits not only for house, for communal area as well. Yeah, if you know a lot of all people within the area, how are you going to design the area to be more accessible? Yeah.
All right, Julie, I think we have one last question before we end this
Yes.
talk. There is a question from one of the audience. What if the current conventional building will become a heritage building in the future? Because as you can see, in the old days, heritage buildings are just conventional building at one point. And also, is it possible to design the timeless design buildings? Wait,
So yeah, someone keep
can
calling
you,
in. Yeah.
sure, can you
So
hear, have you, yeah.
yeah, I hear your questions. So basically, your question is what happens if the conventional buildings now eventually become a heritage building? Yes, it will happen, but maybe in another 100 years' time. So our future heritage buildings could be something like a shopping mall. So they will experiment like why we have shopping mall last time, that during maybe in 2100 years they will feel like, oh, what is shopping mall? They will never see it before. So that can become a heritage building. That shopping mall itself may be some heritage building for them to experience the lifestyle that we are experiencing now. So it's not impossible, yeah. But the heritage building in the future could be something more like a lifestyle experiencing instead of tradition and culture. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much with that. Ms. Julie, thank you also with your presence here and be with us for our 9th issue of Ed Plus. With that, I would like to end this talk. There's been quite a very concise and clear presentation from you. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much for joining this talk as well and listening. Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much.